the first thing that the buyer focuses on is on financials. They call it quality of earnings, Q of E, and that kind of sets the narrative for the remaining period of due diligence. So I'm really excited to have as a guest today, Jeff Rossi. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Keith. Great to be here.
Great. Jeff is a partner with Marcum. Marcum is a national accounting, consulting, and advisory firm. Jeff has a very strong client base. He's worked with family closely held companies his whole career. He has a unique perspective on the due diligence process, specifically even when some of his clients are looking to exit. And Jeff, everybody's in a good mood. You're kind of sitting on the sidelines, the bench and the bullpen ready to go. The sellers really hasn't met you yet. And then we have a kickoff meeting, and the first thing they do is we want to do a Q of E, quality of earnings, and look at the financials. And it's just not the financial statements like tying in cash and receivables. It's a much deeper dive. So, you guys are under some time constraints because you want to get the deal done in 60, 90 days. And so you guys parachute in. I'd love to get your perspective on how you set the stage for that with a potential seller and how you guys go about it. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our podcast, The Ins and Outs of Selling a Business. For those of you just joining us, my name is Keith D. I'm president of Osage Advisors. Osage Advisors is a merger and acquisition firm working with business owners and their families, typically on the sell side. Our clients range in revenues of $5 million and up. This is our 22nd year in business, and we appreciate you joining us today. So today is going to be the last episode for season 2. And I was thinking about a topic that we should take a deeper dive into. And this is a trend we're going to continue on in season 3. And one of the areas I thought that would be beneficial to our audience is a deeper dive into the due diligence area, specifically financial due diligence. We've gone through the process. We put the book together. We've gone to market. We've had multiple conversations. We had management meetings, went through all kinds of negotiations with potential buyers. And as a client, you settled on a specific buyer to move forward. So everybody's in a good mood. Everybody's excited. The emotions are starting to run high because now it becomes real. And the first thing that the buyer focuses on is on financials. They call it quality of earnings, Q of E, and that kind of sets the narrative for the remaining period of due diligence. So I'm really excited to have as a guest today, Jeff Rossi. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Keith. Great to be here.
Great. Jeff is a partner with Marcum. Marcum is a national accounting, consulting, and advisory firm. Jeff has a very strong client base. He's worked with family closely held companies his whole career. He has a unique perspective on the due diligence process, specifically even when some of his clients are looking to exit. And Jeff, everybody's in a good mood. You're kind of sitting on the sidelines, the bench and the bullpen ready to go. The sellers really hasn't met you yet. And then we have a kickoff meeting, and the first thing they do is we want to do a Q of E, quality of earnings, and look at the financials. And it's just not the financial statements like tying in cash and receivables. It's a much deeper dive. So, you guys are under some time constraints because you want to get the deal done in 60, 90 days. And so you guys parachute in. I'd love to get your perspective on how you set the stage for that with a potential seller and how you guys go about it.
Absolutely. So what we do is we work collaboratively with all the professionals, and we try to work around the timeline, work backwards from the potential closing date. And usually it starts with the information request, a little bit, focused on the revenue is the main source, a lot of trailing 12-month activity. A lot of these companies have been audited in the past, and that audit is great to have. It's a foundation, but the diligence really does a deep dive into the revenue and trailing 12 months. Quality of earnings is a concept that gets overlaid in many businesses during the acquisition phase. We work with the sellers to get them comfortable, but a lot of times you bring in industry specialists to augment the team. I had a client that was going through a real deep dive of a business. It was coming off its greatest year ever, and adding the industry specialization to the process really made a big difference. In this case, that particular seller had their best year ever because their industry had cycles. Every 4 years, their largest customers had to come back for major refurbishments. And if you just didn't do that deep dive, you would have missed that. And it was not an atypical revenue cycle. So having the industry expertise added to the equation drove a lot of value on both sides of the equation, but most specifically for the buyer.
Yeah, so the buyer's trying to quantify the numbers. Like revenue, of course, is number one. The backlog, the pipelines. From a seller perspective, this is most of our clients, your clients, are closely held. They really haven't opened up the hood, so to speak. Let people look at their numbers outside of their own accounting firm, right? And so when you start talk about revenue, clients will say, okay, my revenues are X, but then, and you said deeper dive. And so we're looking at things like, revenues by product line, revenues by SKU, revenues by profit margins by revenue, multiple things. So, and the buyer wants to understand the trends, right? So, how do you guys go about that? Because sometimes, these are smaller businesses, right? They may not have that information easily accessible, but you guys kind of have to draw out of them. And again, you're new to the relationship. You have a timeline. How do you guys go about that? Because it's critical.
Yeah, it's very critical. So it's a specialized component of the practice where the individuals involved in the diligence are kind of mobilized like a SWAT team. They make the information requests, and then after the information is gathered and provided, you've got to disseminate through a large volume of information in a short period of time. I alluded to it before, but the industry specialization really adds a lot of value. If it's a retail or consumer product company, an industrial company, or healthcare, we augment everything with industry specialty. That helps the process go a lot quicker. A lot of times the information is provided as a data dump, as you will, and that dump has everything from soup to nuts in it. We've got to get in there, parse out the activity that really makes the value. What's the heart of the business? Like exactly what you alluded to before, Keith. What product lines or SKUs are really driving the revenue? Focus on some that are not, and kind of disseminate all that for the buyer so that they understand exactly what they're getting. In some cases, there's product lines that may or may not be driving value for the business. Sometimes there's concentrations. It's very, very important, as you know, to identify concentrations in the process, both on the customer and supplier side. It also helps identify some potential opportunities and or risks as part of the process.
Yeah, so you're going down the income statement, right? You're looking at the revenues, you're looking at expenses, and of course, almost every deal we work on, middle market, low market, we have the add backs, right? Justification, rationale, verification, whatever you want to call it, right? So, we have, when we get bids in from potential buyers, some buyers will say, okay, we accept your add backs, and this is what our price is going to be. This is our multiple times your adjusted profits, and this is what we're willing to pay. We have other that come in and say, look, we're a little skeptical of like a couple, 3 items here. And so we're not going to include that in our valuation, but their multiples higher, so you still come with the same number. But I know from experience that buyers really are focusing on certain aspects. Okay, you're adding back this because of Y, which is laid out in the materials, but is that really something you're comfortable with from a buyer perspective? Which could be a challenging conversation if they decide they're not comfortable with it down the road during due diligence. So how do you guys navigate through that?
Yeah, I can give you one of the most relevant line items on the adjustments that we've been focusing on the last couple of years. the illustrious COVID adjustment.
Right.
So folks that have been going to market over the last few years, their activity dipped down in some cases because of COVID and the pandemic, but yet they're still moving forward to go to market. We worked with those sellers to understand exactly what their methodology was, try to normalize, it's what industry term, try to normalize things, both pre and post pandemic. Sometimes the information isn't readily available, so you've got to look at projections, year to date information. You have to look at customer orders, kind of trends, and a lot of analytics, and that helps you try to get comfortable with some of those adjustments. Something like a COVID adjustment is a little bit subjective and a little bit soft because the seller really wants it to be strong. They want to represent that adjustment is real, and they want to have that stick because that's driving a lot of the enterprise value. In some cases, they're realistic. In some cases, they're not. And that's where a professional who does this day in and day out to do that deep dive can drive a lot of value for the buyer.
Yeah, so that's interesting. We had a deal last year where we had a big COVID bump, right? And our client capitalized on the fact that there was a need based on COVID. In this case, it was COVID signs and COVID warnings and COVID this, and they ended up. He thought he was going to go out of business when COVID hit, and all of a sudden he got huge increase in business, and because they monopolized, they saw the need and they adapted to it quickly, and so the buyer or buyers in this case has said, okay, is that sustainable? Right, that's the question. Is that sustainable? So and you're going to raise that question from a buy side. And the answer is not yes, it's sustainable. It's like, show me, right? Show me how it's sustainable. Why? So in this case, and you may have some other examples, we were able to show that out of the 5,000 new customers that they picked up during this COVID period, 80% stayed with the business for other needs, new customer acquisitions, right? So that gave comfort to you as a buy side advisor and to the client, your client, of course, that we're comfortable with that. But so maybe there's some ideas where you were comfortable with it and you saw that this is sustainable. And other ideas where you were not so comfortable, and you alerted your client to that fact and how they reacted to it. Maybe you can share a little bit about how that conversation went, because at the end of the day, everybody spent a lot of time and money already going into this transaction, and they want to make it happen. But when you raise concerns to the seller, our clients, the emotions start to run pretty high. They think they're trying to get something, right? When it's really just we want to understand it, right? So I'd love to hear maybe a couple of stories about things that you were able to work through that your client was okay, and maybe the client decided, we got to put a stop on this.
Yeah. So, healthcare, right? I mean, pandemic related, staying on that same theme. One particular seller, just trucks lined up, through the parking lot, off the loading docks, just waiting for every piece of healthcare equipment through the pandemic. Obviously a huge bump in revenue, huge bump in profits, and post-pandemic, a potential go-to-market. And the buyers came in and normalized all of that, looking back at historical trends, looking at the stickiness of some of those new customers that were added on. And it was a big adjustment. The company ended up not selling. It wasn't easy, as you said. Emotions were high, and folks thought that it was going to carry through on the go forward, that these customers were going to stay. It was just a need and a short-term fix through the pandemic. Right. Some customers stayed, but it was not at the same level of activity. It just wasn't. It wasn't sustainable. And through the diligence process, we ascertained, exactly which SKUs were bumped up. It just tied to, the whole pandemic and COVID response. So sometimes it happens in that fashion. Sometimes it's a little bit different. In that case, the seller was okay with it. Just stepped away from the sales process. The investment banker wasn't happy to have the deal not go through. but the buyer and the seller in this case are still in communication. So it may be a transaction that'll happen down the road. The buyer really wanted the business, the seller really wanted to sell, except for that COVID bump and all the scrutiny on it through the diligence process. Tap the brakes a little bit. I think at some point the sales price will come down. To some extent, the buyer may come up a little bit after they see that the business has retained some of those new customers, and I think a transaction will get done. But you got to dive deep for those one-time events.
Right. I mean, I think that's a really good point because you have a really, we always say if you have a willing buyer and a willing seller, you'll find a way to get it done. And it may not be tomorrow, right? I mean, we said in prior, patience is a virtue. It's critical for both the seller perspective and the buyer perspective. And it's, we have a deal right now where it's in the medical field, a medical, manufacturing. They do various parts. And we have a client that they had a softness. But it's just a temporary downturn. I mean, the customer's going to come back, but hey, put things on hold for right now. And the buyer's like, okay, we still like the deal. And we either can structure something now that we pay it out down the road in an earn out, or we can just let's table things for 6 months, and then when it comes back, we'll go back at it. But I think it's not like people tend to think, and that's why you hire firms like us and you. It's not you're not trying to be confront, right, or confrontational with. You're trying to you raise issues that come up, and it's facts, right? We're talking about numbers, so it's pretty much black and white. But if you're talking to each other, say, yeah, this happened, or you lost a big customer, or COVID, or we have a softness in the economy, people get it. Things are not always great all the time, so you kind of have to just have that open dialogue with the buyer and seller and say, okay, let's find a solution to get it done. Right, and the key of that aspect is really understanding the earnings, the quality earnings, quality in quotes, as to okay, is it sustainable? Are you going to meet your projections? What your budgets are looking like? A lot of these questions are asked by folks like you and Marcum to a seller, and he or she's not usually ever had to ask those questions. What are you projecting? Well, I've never do projections. We don't do budgets. We don't do forecasts. But now you have to, right? Because the buyer is paying based on your future capability of earning. So, you've had this conversation. I'd love maybe talk a little bit about your internal conversation with your client, how that went, so they can because eventually they're the person or people or team that's going to approach us as the banker and the client and say, look, this is what we found. This is our concerns. How are we going to fix this? Or how are we going to make this happen or not?
Yeah, you alluded to it earlier, Keith. Emotions run high on the seller side, as you know, right? A lot of these businesses, family businesses, been in the family for a long time. They're the proverbial baby. They've given birth to it. They've taken it through the journey over the years and built the company up. And sometimes the sellers are unrealistic in regards to what they feel the enterprise is worth, and that patience is a virtue is an understatement. I've seen you in action. I've seen you take transactions that were falling apart and work magic and get them to the finish line. I mean, a lot of it is just trying to table those emotions, right, and keep both the buyer and seller focused on the end game and what the benefits are. I know we worked on one transaction together that was really great in regards to you going out to market, finding the right buyer for the company, me on the other side holding the seller to task to it's time for them to sell. Emotions were as high as ever. It could have been one that you could write a book about in regards to emotions flowing on both sides. But that tabling of the emotions and having the professional providers on both sides work together in tandem for everyone's common goal, right? You said before, willing buyer, willing seller. It takes a village, and a lot of these transactions, they fall apart for no reason. And it's unfortunate when that happens because usually there's a lot of time and money invested in, and that's always usually a sad day. It's really a happy day when you have a transaction that's successful and you get to the finish line. And a lot of folks look back and they're like, "This, I've had clients. This is the greatest thing ever. I never thought I would be so happy to have sold the business." And they've ridden that roller coaster of emotions. And on the other side, from the buyer's perspective, they're so happy. You talk to them, years down the road, they're so happy they tucked it in and everything worked out exactly as planned. So sometimes it's about managing the emotions.
Yep. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we always say, is it the value to the seller is not just a price. It's to a number of components. It's the price, it's the fit, it's the culture, it's taking care of my employees. Do I like these people? I mean, are they the right people to take my company to the next level? And if the answer is yes, great. If the answer is no, then you got to kind of rethink where you're going to go. But, to that point is that, this whole financial, kicking the tires, looking under the hood, really, it sets everything in motion post signing a letter of intent, right? And no one wants to spend any other money. And maybe even at the buyer, you have clients that probably have gone out and they've learned, hey, I'm buying this company, and you're like, okay, we're ready. So, I'm going to do it myself. He's trying to save himself a buck or her a buck, right? And then, they don't do the deep dive that you guys get and you guys do in your work, the value you provide. I mean, I always look at it as it's not a cost, it's a value. If I pick up one little thing and during my my QV analysis that my client doesn't have the expertise and maybe have not seen it or done enough transactions, that could save them a lot of money down the road. And I'm sure you at times will have clients that say, hey, I'm just going to do it myself. And they come back to you a year later and say, I should have hired you.
Yeah, I've had unfortunate situations where the buyers have gone out, done the diligence on their own. I remember one particular in the turbine power industry. They went ahead, did all the diligence on their own, did the transaction, and brought us in after. And part of the industry was tied to the railroad industry in regards to power units.
Mm-hmm.
And for like I said, alluded to before, 4-year cycle on the maintenance program. They stepped in, did the diligence off a great year, part of that 4-year cycle. They didn't even realize the cycle existed. That part of the business fell flat over the next 2 years. They were unable to meet debt service, and it wasn't a good situation. Covenants got broke. The former seller started competing. It was the worst scenario of all scenarios. And if the diligence team was in there, they absolutely would have figured out that it was trending and it wasn't revenue that was going to stick, and that there was cycles on certain components of the revenue, and it would have been a situation that would have helped the buyer out tremendously from a lot of pain and suffering over the next 8 years.
Yeah, it goes to point, and these transactions, and we're going to wrap up today. But is that hiring competent professionals who do this for a living is critical to a successful process, both on the buy and the sell side. And speaking of the sell side, there's a new we call sell size QV, right? And which has been promoted and actively engaged on by sellers over maybe the last 5 to 10 years. I'd love to have you come back to kick off season 3 to do a deeper dive on sell side QV, because I think it's a real important topic for potential sellers to really think about. And if you're available, that would be terrific. I'll have you back for next season to kick us off, and really appreciate you being here today. So we'll end up season 2 with you, and we'll kick off season 3 with you. That'd be terrific.
Yeah, thanks for having me at the end of this season. I love to start on that sell side QV. I have the greatest of passions for that. I advise all of my clients to do that. I think it sets the stage from the seller's perspective to be realistic in regards to what the value could be. You get in there, you set your data room, you lay the foundation, and you're ready to go forward with the transaction, both in a realistic expectation as to what the adjustments are, the enterprise value, and then you're actually ready to go through. The last thing you want to do with the company that's going to market is not be ready, because time
Right.
kills all deals.
Exactly. So, Jeff, I want you to hold that thought because we're going to come back with you on a season 3. And thanks again for being with us today. And we will catch up with you when we kick off season 3. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for all your efforts with our clients in the past and in the future. You do a great job. I appreciate your efforts.
I appreciate Jeff. So that's the end of season 2, everybody. Thank you for being here today. If you have any questions, you can reach us at our website at osageadvisors.com or shoot me an email at kdee@osageadvisors.com, or feel free to pick up the phone and give me a call at 860-767-3273, extension 1001. Thanks again. Have a great day, and we hope to see you back for season number 3.